Hi, I'm Colby Hockmuth. Welcome to FedScoopTV. I'm sitting here with Paul Smith, VP and GM for Public Sector Operations at Red Hat. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Colby.
So Paul, what are some of the trends you're seeing in open source technology?
Well, I think in a word, I like the word ubiquity. It's everywhere. I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to look at commercial offerings from Amazon, Yahoo, Google, and find an infrastructure that they built their business on that's not built on open source. So I think what has changed in terms of open source trends is that it's everywhere now, and where it was once all about disruptive technologies, it's now on the leading edge, solving new problems and problems that haven't even been solved yet. And we're seeing a lot of that around popular project brands, if you will, like OpenStack, where Red Hat, again, is taking a leadership role, doing the same types of things that we've done in the past to make Linux popular by being very inclusive with the community and staying active in the community and trying to present an enterprise class version of these new on-the-edge technologies that can be consumed in enterprise use.
Right, and so what are some areas of government that you've seen that have had the quickest adoption of open source technology?
Well, thankfully, the government operates a little bit different than commercial enterprises because they have these things called mandates. So they're all under mandates to share first and cloud first. So there's been pretty good balance across a lot of government agencies for the adoption of open source. And again, in the early days, it was all about how do I commoditize my IT, move to x86 infrastructures, displace older operating systems that maybe weren't innovating as quickly and also dependent on a particular OEM's hardware environment, replace that with Linux, right? So that was the first place where almost every agency now has made really big pushes. I mean, if you look through the government right now, in modern data centers, mostly what you'll find would be Linux or Microsoft. You'd be hard-pressed to find anything from what was an OEM proprietary type of operating system.
And so what are some of the things that the private sector can learn from the way that government has adopted this technology?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's a two-way street. I think the government can learn a lot from the private sector, which is open source, is credible, it's viable, it's scalable, it's agile. I mean, most businesses that are built today and most new data centers that are being built around open source. A lot of it driven by Red Hat, and a lot of it not driven by Red Hat, whether you're talking about cloud, mobility, or cyber. So, there's a lot that government can learn from the private sector. On the other hand, I think what the private sector can learn from government is that, hey, the government's always been very good about joining communities. I mean, when Secure Linux was brought to market, that was the NSA that was doing a lot of the upstream code development. That made its way into SVIRT, which is basically SE Linux for virtualization, which then made it into OpenStack. So we have a secure best practices way to approach these new technologies. That was all because government really took upon themselves to be participative and collaborative with the upstream community. And in addition to that, I think the private sector can learn a lot from the way the government establishes standards, specifically around security. If you just take a look at NIST and some of the documents that they put out in terms of defining what a cloud is, if you take a look at projects like SCAP that define what security looks like, it really becomes the standard bearer for a secure best practices release for open source in an enterprise class type of release.
I think that's a great point. And so looking ahead, how do you see this open source technology adoption evolving?
So evolving on a couple levels. One is cultural. I mean, I know since I've been at Red Hat now for about 9 years that not only do I see a huge adoption of technologies, but it's also a culture. It's the way companies now manage their people. I mean, you take a look at hierarchical type of org charts versus maybe concentric circles. Leadership's not really about title, it's about, do you have followers? So smart people get followers and their ideas are vetted in this community. So culturally, I see, you know, the open source model making its way into a lot of other things in terms of how companies are run, how we communicate and collaborate with competitors, and technology.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Paul.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This is FedScoop TV. I'm Colby Hockmuth.